What if the greatest archive on Earth was not kept in a temple, a palace, or a library, but buried under a continent of silence? Antarctica does not seem to invite memory. It erases it. The wind moves over the white surface like a hand passing again and again over an old page, smoothing every mark until nothing remains but brightness. Yet beneath that brightness lie mountains, rivers, lakes, valleys, ancient soils, and perhaps the broken signatures of worlds that existed before the ice learned how to hide them. So before you let your body sink completely into this comfort, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I am doing here. And if you feel like leaving a small trace of yourself in the darkness, share where you are listening from and your local time, as if placing a quiet pin on the night map of the world. There is a contradiction at the bottom of the Earth. Antarctica is among the most studied places on the planet and still one of the least known. Satellites cross it, aircraft scan it, radar pulses enter its ice and return with ghostly outlines. Drills descend through layers of compacted snow, pulling up cylinders of ancient air. Nations have signed agreements over it, built stations on it, named glaciers, peaks, shelves, domes, basins, and buried lakes. Yet the more carefully it is measured, the more it seems to retreat. It is not empty, it is concealed. And concealment in human history has always had a way of inviting suspicion. The official story is simple enough, and perhaps simple stories are necessary when standing before something too large to hold in the mind. Antarctica was once part of the old southern supercontinent. It moved, cooled, isolated itself behind the circling power of the Southern Ocean, and slowly disappeared beneath ice. The East Antarctic ice sheet began its long reign tens of millions of years ago, and since then much of the continent has lived as a locked room beneath a frozen roof. There is no need in that story for lost cities, forbidden maps, or hidden witnesses. There is only climate, geology, ocean current, time, and cold. But the human mind is not always satisfied by mechanisms. It asks what was there before the door closed. That question is not foolish. Before Antarctica became the white continent, it had forests. Not metaphoric forests, not fantasy forests, but living ones. There were roots in soil, pollen in the air, ferns, conifers, damp ground, and long seasons when the world near the pole could sustain life instead of merely preserving its absence. In rocks and sediments taken from the Antarctic margins, scientists have found the traces of warmer ages, when the continent belonged to a different Earth. It is difficult to imagine now because the present is so persuasive. A glacier seems eternal when one stands before it. Ice has the authority of stone. But it is not stone. It is a memory that can move, and because ice moves, it can destroy. It grinds mountains, deepens valleys, drags rock across rock, and turns old surfaces into powder. Yet in parts of East Antarctica, radar has revealed something more unsettling than destruction: preservation. There are buried landscapes beneath the ice that appear not to have been erased, but protected. Ancient river systems, broad surfaces, and old valleys remain hidden under the cold like a geography that never fully accepted its burial. This does not mean that cities wait below, or that human footsteps crossed those valleys. The timescales reach far beyond accepted human civilization, but it does mean that Antarctica is not only a place where the past died, it is also a place where the past may have survived in shape. Perhaps that is why the continent carries such power in the imagination. It is not merely remote, it is delayed. Its revelations arrive slowly, reluctantly through instruments rather than eyes. The old explorers saw only the surface, white pressure, blue shadows, rock, crevasse, storm. But the modern age has given something stranger. It has shown that beneath the same killing emptiness there are liquid lakes sealed from sunlight, brines that bleed red from glaciers, microbial worlds living without any need for dawn, and mountains buried so completely that no ancient traveller could ever have described them from sight. Antarctica has become a paradox, the most barren continent, and yet one of the deepest reservoirs of hidden life and hidden time. This is where certainty begins to thin, not because science has failed, but because science has made the mystery larger. A sealed lake under kilometres of ice is not a rumour. A warm forest near the ancient pole is not a legend. A buried river landscape is not a dream. The evidence does not prove every old speculation, yet it does something more dangerous to the settled mind. It keeps the door from closing. It allows the thought that the world has changed beyond recognition before, that maps can become obsolete, coastlines can vanish, climates can reverse their meanings, and entire environments can pass from living memory into geological sleep. For some, this has always been the opening through which more controversial ideas enter. Old maps are re-examined. Forgotten theories of displaced crusts are repeated. The lost continent becomes a screen for every anxiety modern people carry about official history. If one place on Earth could hide something, people say, would it not be Antarctica? If one landscape could preserve a record older than archives, would it not be the land no one owned? The land guarded by cold distance, treaty and danger. It is easy to mock such questions. It is harder to explain why they keep returning. The better path may be neither belief nor dismissal. It may be to walk slowly between them, noticing where evidence ends and longing begins. Humanity has always imagined that truth lies buried somewhere, under sand at Giza, under ash at Pompeii, under jungle at Angkor, under water near drowned coasts. Antarctica is the final version of that instinct, a buried world made almost literal. It does not confess, it only preserves, crushes, releases, and conceals according to laws older than memory. And so the first question is not whether Antarctica hides a lost civilization. That is too narrow. The quieter question is whether it hides something even more unsettling. Proof that the Earth itself has many pasts, and that human history may be only the latest thin inscription on a page already written over many times. If the ice has kept forests, lakes, mountains, ancient air and landscapes older than our species, what else has it kept without caring whether anyone is ready to find it? If the ice has kept so much without intention, then the next unease rises almost naturally. What did Antarctica look like before silence became its language? The mind tends to begin with whiteness because that is all the present allows. White plains, white ridges, white storms moving like curtains over the edge of the world. But whiteness is only the latest mask. Long before the continent became a symbol of emptiness, it belonged to a warmer planet, one in which the poles did not mean death, and darkness did not always mean absence. The most difficult thing to accept about Antarctica may not be that it hides mysteries beneath the ice. It may be that the ice itself is the newcomer. There was a time when Antarctica breathed, not with the breath of animals moving through a human forest, not with the familiar rhythm of deer, birdsong or summer insects, but with the deeper respiration of an ancient biosphere. In the age of dinosaurs, parts of the southern polar world carried forests through seasons of strange light and strange darkness. The sun could vanish for long stretches, yet life adapted to the rhythm. Trees grew in a world where the year itself felt divided between excess and deprivation. Their roots entered soil now buried in memory. Their leaves rose into air that no human lungs ever breathed. The land was not waiting to become Antarctica. It was simply living. Traces of that life have been found not as grand ruins, but as quieter witnesses. Fossil pollen, spores, ancient roots, sediments that speak in the slow grammar of climate. A person looking for spectacle may feel disappointed by such evidence, because it does not resemble a golden mask or a carved inscription. Yet this is often how the oldest truths survive. Not as monuments, but as fragments too small to impress the untrained eye. A grain of pollen can outlive a kingdom. A smear of ancient organic matter can carry the outline of an entire vanished climate. The world preserves itself in humble forms, as though knowing that grandeur is easily broken. Researchers studying sediment cores from near the Antarctic coast have described signs of temperate rainforest conditions during the mid-Cretaceous, around 90 million years ago. That number is so large it becomes almost weightless. 90 million years does not feel like history. It feels like a dark ocean beyond history, a place where imagination loses its footing. Yet the evidence points to a world in which carbon dioxide levels were high, global temperatures were warmer, and the polar regions could sustain vegetation that seems impossible from the viewpoint of the modern ice. Antarctica, in that older arrangement of Earth, was not a void at the bottom of the map. It was part of the living surface, and still there is a danger in saying this too quickly. The human mind hears rainforest and begins to paint a tropical dream. Parrots, bright flowers, hot rain, leaves dripping under equatorial sun. But the Antarctic forest was not that. It was a polar forest, a strange forest, a forest that had to endure long months without sunlight. Its darkness was not the darkness of death, but of adaptation. Plants and ecosystems found ways to exist beneath rhythms that would feel alien to modern experience. In this, the ancient Antarctic forest becomes more haunting, not less. It suggests that life does not need the world to resemble our comfort. It needs only a narrow permission, a possible opening. The question then shifts. If Antarctica once held forests, rivers, soils, and perhaps animals moving through those shadowed seasons, how much of that old world remains under the ice not as life, but as arrangement? A forest can vanish, a climate can vanish, but a valley may remain, a basin may remain, a buried channel may still remember where water once moved. Even when the living tissue is gone, the skeleton of the landscape can persist. This is why the continent feels less like a blank slate than a covered painting. No one standing above it can see the image, but instruments have begun to find the lines beneath the paint. There is something unsettling in the thought that ice can be both destroyer and curator. In one place it scours the land until the old surface is gone forever. In another, especially where ice has remained cold-based and slow, it may seal the ground away from erosion. The same element that buries a world may also protect it from weather, air, and time. This is not the preservation of a museum, chosen and labelled. It is blind preservation. It saves what it saves. It ruins what it ruins. And because it has no intention, it becomes more mysterious. There is no curator to question, no guardian to accuse. This is where the sleep-like rhythm of the story deepens into unease. Antarctica's ancient warmth does not prove that forgotten humans walked there. The dates are wrong for that, at least according to everything currently accepted about human origins, but it does loosen the grip of the present. It reminds the listener that the current map is not the original map. The frozen continent is not a beginning but a late condition. What appears impossible now may have been ordinary under another sky. And once that door opens, even slightly, other questions begin to gather in the cold. What does it mean for a continent to change identity completely? Not merely to be conquered, renamed, or misunderstood, but to become almost the opposite of itself. A living polar forest becomes a dead white desert. Rivers become buried channels. Soil becomes a secret. Warmth becomes an accusation against the present. Perhaps the deepest mystery is not whether there was once life in Antarctica. That has already been answered, at least in part. The deeper mystery is how easily the world can forget its own face, and how easily human beings mistake the latest face for the true one. Somewhere beneath the ice, there may still be ancient surfaces that last saw open air before humanity existed. They do not remember humans. They do not wait for human discovery. They simply remain, sealed in darkness, while above them nations build stations, satellites pass, maps grow more precise. The buried land is older than every language used to describe it. And if such a land can sleep beneath our instruments, unchanged enough to be recognized after millions of years, then one quiet question follows the listener into the next darkness. When the ice finally reveals what it has covered, will it show only what Earth once was, or something about what every civilization eventually becomes? If Antarctica once breathed, then the next mystery is not simply how it died, but how a continent could close itself so completely that the rest of the world began to forget it had ever been alive. Death is too sudden a word for what happened there. Antarctica was not struck into silence in a single night. It drifted toward it. It separated, cooled, became encircled, and slowly passed from one identity into another, as though the planet itself were turning a key inside a lock. What had once belonged to a wider southern world became the loneliest landmass on Earth, not because it vanished from the globe, but because conditions gathered around it until the approach itself became a kind of warning. Long before maps gave Antarctica its hard white outline, it was part of Gondwana, the immense southern assembly that joined lands now scattered across the world. South America, Africa, Australia, India, Antarctica, and fragments between them once belonged to a geography that would seem impossible to modernize. Continents were not fixed symbols, they were slow travellers. They broke, pivoted, opened oceans and carried climates with them, like old garments gradually becoming unsuitable. Antarctica did not begin as an exile. It became one through movement, through separation, through the quiet violence of plate tectonics acting on a timescale beyond morning. When Australia pulled away and South America opened distance from the Antarctic peninsula, the sea was given a new path. Water could begin to circle the southern continent more freely. In time, the Antarctic circumpolar current became one of the most powerful engines in Earth's climate system, a cold ring that helped isolate Antarctica from warmer waters to the north. It is difficult not to see something symbolic in this, a continent surrounded by a moving moat, sealed not by walls of stone but by an ocean current that never sleeps. No empire built it, no priesthood ordered it, yet it became one of the most effective barriers in natural history. Around 34 million years ago, near the boundary between the Eocene and Oligocene, Earth cooled sharply enough for large-scale Antarctic glaciation to take hold. The number returns like a heavy bell. 34 million years. Long before humans, long before mammoths, long before the first stone tool, ice began making its claim. Snow accumulated, compressed, thickened, and spread. Glaciers moved outward from high places, valleys disappeared, shorelines changed their meanings. The continent did not become white all at once, but the direction had changed. A door that had stood open for ages began to swing inward. There is no need to imagine conspiracy in this closing. Climate can be a greater force of erasure than any empire. It does not ban books, it removes the shelves. It does not silence witnesses, it outlives them. In warmer lands, ruins can be buried by sand, swallowed by jungle, drowned by rising seas. But Antarctica introduced a different scale of forgetting. It did not merely cover what came before. It placed the past under kilometres of pressure, under cold so severe that even decay became uncertain. The continent became a vault, but also a millstone. Some traces were preserved, others were crushed beyond recognition, and no one, for millions of years, was there to ask which was which. This is where the mind begins to understand why Antarctica feels different from other mysteries. Egypt hides chambers, but people built Egypt. Mesopotamia hides tablets, but hands shaped the clay. The Maya left cities beneath trees. and the trees, however dense, still belong to a human timescale. Antarctica's hidden world is older and less obedient. Its secrets do not arrange themselves around human drama. They belong to climate, biology, stone, and deep time. That should make them less frightening. Somehow it makes them more so. A human secret has a motive, a planetary secret has only consequence. Or, if the ice began to form at such ancient dates, then the more extravagant claims about ancient human civilizations beneath the continent must meet a hard wall of time. No accepted evidence places human civilization anywhere near those buried landscapes when the first great ice sheets began to grow. The honest path cannot ignore that, but the honest path also cannot ignore another discomfort. Not all of Antarctica has been equally buried for the same length of time, and not all coastal margins share the same history. Ice advances and retreats. Shelves grow and collapse, exposure and concealment vary across millions of years. The story is not a single white blanket lowered once over a fixed bed. It is movement, retreat, return, and pressure written in slow waves. And perhaps this is where the more useful mystery begins. Not with imagining a city perfectly waiting beneath the ice, its towers intact and lamps still cold, but with asking how much of Earth's previous worlds are hidden from ordinary history because they fall outside the scale of human memory. Civilizations are used to thinking in thousands of years, religions in sacred ages, empires in dynasties, but the Earth thinks in millions. A coastline can be born, drowned, lifted, and erased before a species learns to name the sea. A forest can become coal, a lake can become stone. A continent can change its climate so completely that later creatures mistake the transformation for essence. The isolation of Antarctica also created a moral illusion. Because no ancient nation truly possessed it in the way kingdoms possessed river valleys, modern people often imagine it as pure, untouched outside history. But untouched does not mean empty. A sealed page is still a page, a locked room is still a room. The continent's remoteness did not remove it from Earth's story, it simply delayed human reading. Perhaps that is why every new measurement feels faintly forbidden, even when it is ordinary science. Radar crossing the ice seems like a whisper at a door that has been closed since before humanity had a voice. Above the buried valleys, storms pass without memory. The Southern Ocean continues its endless circling, keeping the old isolation alive. Research stations glow briefly in the polar night, fragile and temporary, like lanterns set on the roof of an ancient tomb too large to enter. Beneath them, the ice holds pressure, darkness, trapped air, crushed snow, and the outlines of a continent that once belonged to another Earth. If Antarctica did not simply freeze, but was slowly locked away by the turning of the oceans and the cooling of the planet, then the next question becomes more difficult. What happens to a world when the lock does not only hide its past, but preserves the shape of the key? If the lock has preserved the shape of the key, then the buried rivers of East Antarctica may be among the first faint outlines of it. They are not rivers now. No open water shines there under a grey sky. No banks soften with moss. No stones sit in shallow current. What remains is stranger, the memory of rivers held beneath ice so thick that sunlight cannot even become a rumour. Modern instruments have begun to trace these hidden forms not by seeing them, but by listening for the way signals return from below. Radar enters the frozen mass, passes through layers of old snow and compressed time, and comes back carrying the faint geometry of a world that should have vanished. There is a special kind of unease in discovering a landscape without touching it. The old explorers knew the surface with their bodies. Frost bit their skin, crevasses opened under their feet. Wind erased their tracks almost as soon as they made them. But the buried land is known through distance, through waves, through images constructed from echoes. It appears as lines, depressions, basins, valleys, and channels beneath the ice sheet. The eye sees a map, but the mind feels something older than a map. It feels the presence of terrain that has not seen the sky for millions of years, and yet has not entirely lost its form. In parts of East Antarctica, researchers have described an ancient landscape of valleys and highlands preserved under the ice, a place shaped by rivers before the Great Freezing sealed it away. These features are not proof of any lost city, and they should not be forced into that shape simply because the imagination hungers for stone walls and stairways. Their power lies elsewhere. A river system means time, slope, rainfall, drainage, erosion, and climate. It means a surface that once had direction. Water knew where to go. Gravity wrote its patient script across the land. Then the script was covered before it could be completely destroyed. What kind of world leaves its riverbeds behind but takes away the rivers? The question feels almost too simple, and yet it contains the whole sorrow of Antarctica. A river is among the most familiar signs of life's possibility. Human beings built their first cities beside rivers, not because rivers were mysterious, but because they were generous. They carried silt, fish, troubadours, borders, and gods. To hear that Antarctica had old river landscapes is not to hear that people lived there. It is to hear that the continent once belonged to the same grammar that made human worlds possible elsewhere. Flow, shelter, valley, water, passage. The ingredients are older than humanity, but the pattern is recognizable. This recognition may be what makes the discovery so haunting. A mountain under ice can feel abstract, a buried basin can feel geological and remote, but a riverbed is intimate. It suggests movement. It suggests a path taken again and again. Even if no human foot ever followed it, the form is familiar to the human body. The mind can walk beside it. It can imagine sound where there is now only pressure. It can imagine mist in a valley now sealed beneath white mass. The danger is not imagination itself. The danger is forgetting where imagination begins. Yet without imagination, even evidence remains mute. The preserved landscapes beneath East Antarctica also complicate the idea of ice as pure erasure. For years, many assumed that such thick ice must have ground everything beneath it into shapeless ruin. In many places, it surely did. Glaciers can be merciless sculptors. They deepen troughs, scrape bedrock, and drag the past forward like a burden. But some ice, especially where frozen firmly to its bed and moving slowly, can act less like a blade and more like a cover. Under those conditions, ancient surfaces may survive far longer than intuition allows. The continent becomes not one story, but many. Some areas destroyed, some altered, some guarded by the very cold that seemed to condemn them. This is the kind of truth that unsettles both skeptics and dreamers. It refuses a simple answer. It does not say that Antarctica is hiding a human empire, but it also does not allow Antarctica to remain an empty white symbol. It says that beneath the surface there are older surfaces. Beneath the map there are older maps. Beneath the modern climate, there are climates so different that the present begins to feel temporary. And if a landscape can be preserved beneath ice for millions of years, then the old assumption that time always destroys begins to weaken. Sometimes time covers, sometimes time waits. One might wonder what it would feel like if the ice were removed, not suddenly as disaster, but in the impossible manner of a dream. Imagine the white mass lifting away from East Antarctica like a veil drawn from an ancient floor. There would be no golden city waiting in the first light, no statues turning their faces upward. More likely there would be rock, sediment, channels, ridges, weathered plains, and the scars of a climate no living person has known. Yet even that would be enough. The shock would not come from human ruins. It would come from seeing a world that had continued to exist without being seen, a world absent from every lived memory and present beneath every modern map. This is why Antarctica is such a dangerous subject for the imagination. It does not need to offer proof of hidden civilization to disturb the story of civilization. It only needs to show that whole environments can be removed from view while still remaining real. Human history depends on surfaces: roads, walls, fields, graves, coastlines, documents, bones. But what happens when the surface itself is taken away? What happens when the evidence of a world is placed beneath ice so deep that only machines can translate it? The absence begins to resemble intention, even when no intention exists. Perhaps this is how myths are born in the modern age. Not from ignorance alone, but from partial revelation. A shadow appears beneath the ice, a valley is traced, a lake is found, a mountain range emerges from radar, like the memory of a buried giant. The facts are real, yet incomplete. Into the incomplete space longing enters. Some long for proof that human history is older than allowed. Others long for assurance that nothing lies beneath except stone and time. But Antarctica gives neither side full comfort. It offers measured fragments, and fragments are often more powerful than answers. So the buried rivers remain where they are, silent beneath the East Antarctic ice sheet, carrying no water and yet still carrying meaning. They are old passages without travellers, old valleys without weather, old directions without motion. Above them the ice sheet breathes in its own slow way, thickening, thinning, shifting, responding to a warming world. If one day more of those hidden channels is mapped, and the old drainage of the continent becomes clearer, the question will not only be what scientists have discovered, it will be what the discovery does to the mind that receives it. For if Antarctica can preserve the memory of rivers after the rivers are gone, what other vanished things might survive not as objects, but as shapes waiting beneath the silence? If shapes can survive without motion, then water beneath Antarctica becomes a quieter contradiction. Water should mean openness. It should reflect sky, receive rain, carry light in broken pieces. Yet under the ice there are lakes that have not known the sky in ages, bodies of water sealed beneath pressure and cold, living in darkness so complete that ordinary imagination turns away from it. The buried rivers of East Antarctica suggest that the continent remembers movement. The buried lakes suggest something more intimate, that beneath a surface famous for death, there may be pockets where life has continued without asking permission from the sun. Lake Vostok is the name that most often gathers around this idea, perhaps because the name itself sounds like a door at the edge of the world. Hidden under kilometres of ice in East Antarctica, it is one of the largest known subglacial lakes on Earth. For a long time it existed in human knowledge as an absence, a strange flatness detected beneath the ice sheet, an anomaly that became clearer through radar and measurement. No waves broke its surface, no bird crossed it, no human being stood on its shore. Its shore, if that word can even be used, was not a place for walking. It was a boundary between water, rock, and ice. The discovery of such lakes changed the emotional meaning of Antarctica. A continent once imagined as frozen solid, it was revealed to contain hidden liquid worlds. Not one lake alone, but hundreds of subglacial lakes have been identified beneath the ice sheet, linked by channels and slow exchanges of water. This does not make Antarctica warm in any ordinary sense. It makes it stranger. Heat from the earth, pressure from the ice, salt, friction, and ancient basins can keep water liquid where the surface says it should be impossible. The result feels like a secret written in physics. The coldest landscapes may contain unseen reservoirs. For those who study life at its limits, such places are rehearsals for a larger question. If microbes can survive beneath Antarctic ice in darkness, pressure, cold and isolation, then perhaps life elsewhere in the solar system need not wait for sunlight either. Europa, with its buried ocean under ice, and Enceladus sending plumes into space from a hidden sea, enter the Antarctic story because Earth itself has been practicing the impossible. The farther science looks outward, the more it finds that this planet contains conditions once reserved for alien worlds. Yet the word life should be spoken carefully here. It does not mean glowing creatures moving through an underground ocean, or lost animals sealed away since the age of dinosaurs. It may mean microbial communities, chemical survival, slow metabolism, faint biological traces. This is humble life, nearly invisible, easy to overlook, and perhaps more profound because of that. Human beings tend to honour life when it is large enough to resemble them. But beneath Antarctic ice, life, if present, is not performing for witnesses. It persists in secrecy, stripped of all spectacle. There have been long debates over contamination and caution in exploring subglacial lakes. To drill downwards is to risk carrying the surface into the sealed world below. A lake isolated for perhaps hundreds of thousands or millions of years is not only a scientific target, it is an ethical problem. What does it mean to enter a place untouched by the modern atmosphere, microbes, machines? Discovery can resemble intrusion. Knowledge can become disturbance. A sealed lake asks not only what is hidden there, but what right the present has to open it. This is one reason Antarctica has attracted both referenda and suspicion. Restrictions, protocols, clean drilling methods, international caution, and environmental rules can look to a suspicious mind like concealment. Yet there are practical reasons for restraint. A hidden lake is fragile because its isolation is part of the evidence. To contaminate it would be to confuse the answer one came to find. Still, the feeling remains. When a place is difficult to access, protected by law and described in careful language, imagination begins to hear locked doors. There is a quieter lesson inside that suspicion. Modern people are often told that the age of mystery is over, that satellites have photographed the world, that maps are complete, that science has replaced old darkness with clean certainty. Then Antarctica reveals a lake larger than many surface lakes, hidden under ice, invisible to every unaided eye, and the claim begins to fail. The world has not become fully visible. It has become visible only according to the instruments we use. Before radar, the lake was still there. Reality is not limited by human notice. One may imagine the darkness above Lake Vostok not as empty blackness, but as weight. Ice overhead, layer upon layer. Each layer wants snowfall, each snowfall wants weather. Each weather wants an hour in an ancient sky. Time itself presses downward. Trapped bubbles higher in the ice hold poor old atmospheres, tiny sealed breaths of earth. Below them lies liquid water that may have exchanged almost nothing with the surface for immense spans of time. Antarctica becomes less like a continent than a vertical archive, a stack of climates, silences, pressures, and unanswered questions. And if there are organisms there, or chemical traces of organisms, what would they mean? Not evidence of ancient civilization, not a forbidden race beneath the ice. Something more unsettling in a different way. They would mean that life does not always need history, sunlight, or witness. It can narrow itself to endurance. It can become patient beyond human measure. It can inhabit a darkness so complete that myth would have called it death. Such life would not make the hidden lake less lonely. It would make loneliness itself seem alive. The buried rivers asked what shapes might remain. The buried lakes ask what processes might continue. Preservation is no longer only about fossils, valleys, or ancient air. It becomes active. Water moves slowly, chemistry unfolds, microbes may divide, sleep, wake, and feed according to rules that barely touch the surface world. Above, explorers plant flags, governments sign treaties, documentaries speak of secrets, and viewers drift towards sleep. Below, without witness, the old dark water remains. Perhaps that is the deepest discomfort. Antarctica does not simply preserve the past as something dead and completed. It may preserve conditions in which the past still behaves. A lake sealed away is not a photograph. It is a room in which something may still be happening. And if the continent contains such rooms beneath its white silence, then the next question waits with redder, stranger force. What happens when the ice does not merely hide water, but releases from its own body a colour that looks almost like a wound? If the hidden lakes suggest that darkness can remain alive, then Bloodfalls gives that idea a visible wound. It appears at the edge of Taylor Glacier in the McMurdo Dry Valleys, where a stain of deep red seeps from the ice and runs across the pale surface like something the continent failed to keep sealed. The first sight of it can feel almost theatrical, too symbolic to be real. Red water emerging from blue-white ice in one of the coldest, driest deserts on Earth. Yet its strangeness does not come from fiction. It comes from chemistry, geology, and a hidden reservoir old enough to make the present feel temporary. The red is not blood, though the name refuses to let the mind fully forget the image. It is iron-rich brine, oxidizing when it reaches the air, much as iron rusts when exposed. Beneath the glacier lies a salty system, cut off from the world, carrying dissolved iron and shaped by conditions hostile to almost everything familiar. The water is cold, dense, dark and briny. It does not pour out like a river of life. It seeps, it stains. It appears and disappears according to pressures inside the glacier, as though the ice were breathing through a damaged seam. When Bloodfalls was first observed by explorers in the early 20th century, its colour demanded explanation. Guesses imagined red algae, because life seemed the easiest way to explain such a living-looking stain. Later study showed a more complicated and more haunting truth. The colour came from iron, and the source was a brine system locked beneath the glacier, one that may have been isolated for a very long time. But life did not vanish from the story. Microbial communities and chemical processes became part of the deeper question. In a world without sunlight, organisms may survive by using minerals and compounds rather than bright economy of plants. They do not need a green world, they need a pathway. There is something humbling in that. Human beings often imagine life as abundance, forests, fields, animals moving under a generous sky. But Antarctica keeps suggesting that life can also be narrow, secretive and almost silent. A microbe in dark brine is not picturesque. It does not satisfy the ancient hunger for monsters beneath the ice. Yet it may be a more serious mystery than any monster, because it shows how little life requires in order to continue. The old categories soften. Dead landscape, living landscape, hostile world, habitable world. Antarctica does not permit those divisions to remain clean. Bloodfalls also teaches another lesson about appearances. A red stain on ice looks like revelation, but it is only the visible tip of an invisible system. What the eye receives is the final gesture of a process hidden under glacier, rock, salt, and time. This is often how Antarctica reveals itself. It gives the surface a sign, then keeps the mechanism below. A red flow, a flat patch of ice, a faint radar reflection, a trapped bubble in an ice core. Each sign is small, modest, yet it points downward into a structure too large to grasp at once. And because the sign is red, imagination cannot remain neutral. Red is the colour of warning, of injury, of sacrifice, of forbidden places in old stories. The scientific explanation does not remove that symbolic force. It only relocates it. The wound is chemical, not supernatural. But does a natural wound cease to be a warning? Perhaps the deeper unease comes from seeing the planet display the language of the body. The glacier bleeds, not because it is alive in any human sense, but because human beings have no other word for such an image. The mind translates what it cannot hold. The McMurdo Dry Valleys themselves add to the feeling of exile. They're among the driest places on Earth, polar deserts where the absence of snow can feel more disturbing than its abundance. Bare ground, cold wind, exposed rock, frozen lakes, and a kind of lunar stillness make the landscape seem less like the end of the world than a world before comfort was invented. In such a place, bloodfalls appears not as decoration but interruption. It is colour where colour seems forbidden. It is flow where movement should have stopped. It is a reminder that under surfaces called dead, systems may persist. This persistence has mattered beyond Antarctica. Scientists have looked to bloodfalls and similar environments as analogues for possible life beyond Earth. If microbial ecosystems can endure in dark, cold, salty, iron-rich environments beneath ice, then the search for life elsewhere changes its emotional centre. One does not need blue skies, warm oceans, or green continents. One may need only liquid water, energy gradients, chemistry, and time. Antarctica then becomes not merely a record of Earth's past, but a rehearsal for questions that extend into space. The bottom of our world becomes a mirror for worlds not yet reached. Still, the listener should remain wary of exaggeration. Bloodfalls does not prove hidden civilizations, ancient machines, or deliberate concealment. Its power lies precisely in being real without needing embellishment. It belongs to that class of phenomena that make conspiracy unnecessary and wonder unavoidable. The truth is already strange enough. A glacier in Antarctica releases red iron-rich brine from a hidden system where life may persist in darkness, and this happens on the surface of a continent that once held forests and now hides lakes under kilometres of ice. What fiction needs to be added to that? Yet history, even natural history, is never only about facts. It is about what facts do to the imagination. Bloodfalls does something dangerous. It gives Antarctica a visible secret. Not a theory, not a rumour, not a line on a disputed map, but a stain one can photograph. It says in colour that the ice is not simple. It says that below the white surface there are pockets, pressures, chemistries and old waters still trying to move. It says that the continent's silence is not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of something withheld. Perhaps this is why the image remains so difficult to dismiss. The red water does not roar. It does not open a gate. It does not reveal an underworld. It only seeps out slowly, patiently, as if the buried continent were allowing a single sentence to escape. And the sentence is incomplete. It tells of iron, salt, darkness, microbes, isolation, and time, but it does not tell how many other hidden systems lie beneath the ice, without any red sign to betray them. If one glacier can carry such a secret to the surface, what remains sealed in places where the ice has never learned to bleed? If one glacier can betray a hidden system through a red wound, then the mountains beneath Antarctica represent the opposite kind of secret. Not a stain on the surface, but a vastness that leaves almost no sign at all. The Gamburtsev Mountains lie buried under the East Antarctic ice sheet, a range often compared in scale to the Alps, yet invisible from the world above. No ancient shepherd climbed them, no monastery clung to their slopes, no traveller crossed a pass and returned with stories of storms or echoes. They are mountains without folklore, mountains without roads, mountains that entered human knowledge not through sight, but through instruments moving over whiteness. There is something deeply unnatural, at least to the human imagination, about a mountain range no one can see. Mountains are supposed to declare themselves. They divide weather, shape rivers, guide migration, attract temples, frighten armies, and appear in myths because they rise above the ordinary world. To bury mountains is to reverse their meaning. It is to take the most visible form of landscape and make it secret. Antarctica does this without effort. It hides not only delicate things, not only old pollen, trapped air, or faint water systems, but enormous structures of stone. This can conceal the scale itself. The increase of the Gamburtsev Mountains were detected during the great age of polar geophysics, when exploration was becoming less a matter of flags and sledges, and more a matter of magnetometers, seismic readings, gravity measurements, and radar. Their discovery unsettled expectations. Under the apparent smoothness of the ice lay sharp relief, peaks and valleys, an old architecture of the bedrock that should have belonged to the open air. Later surveys deepened the mystery. How had such high mountains formed in the interior of East Antarctica? Why had they survived? What role had they played in the birth and behaviour of the ice sheet above them? The questions are technical, but their emotional shadow is larger. A mountain range hidden beneath ice asks the mind to accept that the world can contain grandeur without witness. Not smallness hidden in darkness. Grandeur, a buried Alps at the bottom of the earth. Perhaps the name itself, Gamburtsev, feels too quiet for what it holds. It does not carry the ancient weight of Himalaya, Andes, Atlas, or Olympus. It entered the map late, named not by memory or myth, but by survey. Yet the rocks beneath that name are older than the naming mind. They had their own long story before anyone drew their outline on a scientific chart. Some researchers have suggested that the Gamburtsev Mountains may have been important in the growth of the East Antarctic ice sheet. High terrain can seed ice. Snow gathers, compacts, and spreads outward. A mountain hidden today may once have helped create the very ice that now hides it. This image is almost too perfect, the buried thing becoming the architect of its own burial. The mountains lift the cold, catch the snow, begin the accumulation, and over time the white weight thickens until the peaks vanish beneath the system they helped summon. A natural process, yes, but also an unsettling parable. It suggests that concealment does not always arrive from outside. Sometimes a world creates the conditions by which it becomes hidden. Civilizations can do this as well, though in different ways. They build archives that later burn, roads that direct invaders inward, monuments that attract looters, doctrines that preserve some memories and condemn others. They organize knowledge, and in doing so decide what may be forgotten. Antarctica's mountains did not choose their burial, but their story echoes the older pattern. What preserves can also obscure, what supports can also entomb. The ice above the Gamburtsevs is not merely a covering sheet, it is an active burden, flowing, thickening, transmitting pressure, responding to climate and shaping the way scientists can read what lies beneath. Radar does not give the same certainty as walking a ridge. It gives profiles, reflections, interpretations, models. The hidden mountains become known through translation. Every image is mediated. Every map is partly an act of reconstruction. Even modern certainty, here, arrives as an echo. That echo changes how one thinks about maps. A map of Antarctica without the ice is a map of a forbidden face, not forbidden by law, but by circumstance. It shows trenches, basins, ridges, and mountain routes that no human eye has ever seen in full daylight. Such maps can appear almost indecent, like anatomical drawings of a sleeping giant. The surface has been removed in imagination, and suddenly the white continent becomes darkly complex. Antarctica is not a blank cap. It is a rough, mountainous continent wearing a mask. And masks matter because they shape belief. For centuries, the unknown southern land existed in European imagination before it was confirmed by exploration. Terra Australis appeared as a balancing idea, a necessary land imagined to counterweight the known continents of the north. Even before Antarctica was seen, it had been drawn inside human expectation. Later, when the real continent emerged from fog, ice, and dangerous seas, it did not end speculation. It changed speculation's clothing. The unknown had been found, but then it was found to contain another unknown beneath itself. The Gamburtsev Mountains intensify that older feeling. They show that discovery can be layered. One does not simply find Antarctica and finish the task. One finds the coastline, then the interior, then the ice thickness, then the lakes, then the buried rivers, then the mountains under mountains of ice. Each answer becomes a floor, and beneath it another chamber appears. This is why the continent resists closure. The more it is mapped, the less it resembles completion. It resembles a manuscript with pages glued together by cold. For the sleep-bound listener, perhaps the image can be held quietly, an invisible range under a white night, peaks that have not felt wind for millions of years, valleys where no sound moves except the imagined pressure of ice. Nothing dramatic happens there. No door opens, no figure steps out, yet the stillness itself becomes immense. The mountains continue to exist without needing attention, without being useful, without entering myth until instruments gave them back to language. And if mountains can be hidden so completely that humanity discovered them only through indirect signals, then perhaps the next unease must turn toward maps themselves. Not because every old map is correct, or because every strained coastline conceals a forbidden truth, but because cartography has always been a negotiation between knowledge and desire. When the unseen can be real, the human eye begins to look differently at the seen. It asks whether certain maps knew too little, or whether, in a few disputed cases, they seem to know too much. If hidden mountains can exist beneath a blank white surface, then old maps begin to gather a different kind of unease. Not because they must be believed, and not because every strange coastline is a message from a forgotten age, but because maps are among the most dangerous objects human beings make. They pretend to be calm. They lie flat on the tables. They carry ink, coastlines, names, compass roses, and measured spaces. Yet every map is also an argument about what can be known. It says quietly, "This is the shape of the world," or at least the shape someone was willing to preserve. Few maps have attracted more restless attention than the Piri Reis map of 1513, drawn by an Ottoman admiral and cartographer using older sources he said were available to him. Only a fragment survives, but that fragment has been enough to build a long afterlife of speculation. It shows parts of the Atlantic world, Western Africa, the eastern coast of South America, and a southern coastline that some have argued resembles Antarctica before ice. That claim has travelled far beyond academic caution. It has entered books, documentaries, late-night conversations, and the uncertain borderland where history, mystery, and longing meet. The more restrained reading is less dramatic. The southern shape may be a distorted continuation of South America, a cartographic compression, an error, or a construction based on limited information and inherited traditions of map-making. 16th century maps often blended observation with older authorities, sailor reports, political desire, and guesswork. Coastlines bent, islands multiplied, unknown lands stretched into imagined forms. The world was being redrawn in real time, and errors were not failures of imagination. They were part of the process by which the unknown was slowly negotiated into the known. Yet the controversial claim refuses to disappear because it touches something deeper than the map itself. It asks whether knowledge can survive without its origin story. What if an old chart contains an accurate fragment copied from an older chart, which was copied from an even older source, and so on until the beginning has vanished? This is not impossible in principle. Ancient knowledge has often survived through copying, translation, loss, distortion, and rediscovery. Texts passed from Greek into Arabic into Latin. Astronomical records travelled across cultures. Myths carried memories of floods, eruptions, migrations, and drowned places long after their first witnesses died. The problem is not that transmission cannot happen. The problem is knowing when transmission is evidence and when it is desire wearing evidence as clothing. Charles Hapgood, the 20th century writer and professor, gave much of this Antarctic map mystery its modern shape. He proposed that certain old maps might preserve traces of an advanced ancient geographical knowledge, and he linked this to ideas about crustal displacement, a controversial theory suggesting that Earth's outer shell could shift dramatically. His work attracted curiosity partly because Albert Einstein showed interest in the broader physical question, even while the theory did not become accepted geology. In later decades, Hapgood's ideas became fuel for alternative history, especially for those seeking a lost civilization older than Egypt, older than Sumer, older than the accepted beginning of complex society. There is a temptation here, and the temptation should be named gently. When modern history feels too narrow, when official timelines seem too clean, when ruins and myths leave emotional gaps, the mind begins looking for a master key. Antarctica becomes an attractive lock. A map that seems to show too much becomes the key's shadow. The story forms almost by itself. Someone knew the continent before the ice, someone mapped it, someone preserved the map. And later institutions either forgot, dismissed, or concealed the truth. The pattern is powerful because it resembles other real historical losses. Libraries have burned, empires have censored, conquerors have rewritten chronicles. Whole languages have gone silent. Why then should geography be immune to forgetting? But the honest voice must stay low and careful. The Piri Reis map does not prove an ice-free Antarctica known to ancient navigators. Hapgood's theory remains outside mainstream geology. The accepted formation of Antarctica's major ice sheets creates serious difficulties for claims of human mapping before the ice. And yet dismissal alone also fails to satisfy, not because the extraordinary claims are proven, but because the hunger behind them is real. People are not only asking whether one map is accurate, they're asking how much of human memory has been copied badly, translated poorly, buried deliberately, or left to rot in rooms no one thought to save. Old maps are haunted because they stand between measurement and myth. They belong to the age when the world still had edges in the mind. Monsters swam in margins not only because cartographers were foolish, but because blankness itself demanded symbols. A blank space is never neutral. It accuses the mapmaker. It admits ignorance, so the blank is filled. With beasts, wind heads, decorative mountains, imagined coasts, warnings, gods, ships, and names given before certainty. Antarctica for centuries was not a place but a necessity. The imagined southern land that balanced the world. Long before men stood on its ice, the idea of it had already entered human order. Perhaps this is why the later discovery of the real continent did not quiet the older dream. The continent was found, but not fully revealed. Its edges could be charted, but its interior remained hostile. Its surface could be crossed, but its bedrock remained hidden. Even after satellites, radar, treaties, and ice cores, Antarctica still behaves like an unfinished map. It has coastlines and coordinates, but beneath them another geography persists, unreadable to ordinary sight. The old cartographers had blank margins. The modern world has white surfaces over dark relief. The symbol has changed, but the feeling remains. There is also a philosophical wound inside cartography. To draw the world is to reduce it. A map must leave things out in order to be useful. It must simplify mountains, flatten seas, convert living coasts into lines. Perhaps all history works this way. It makes a map of time and in doing so leaves out countless valleys. The official timeline of civilization may be accurate in its broad structure, yet still incomplete in texture, in lost experiments, failed societies, vanished coastal settlements, oral memories never written down. A map can be correct and impoverished at the same time. So the disputed maps of Antarctica should not be treated as proof of a forbidden civilization, but they should not be discarded as meaningless curiosities either. They reveal the pressure created when evidence, uncertainty, and imagination meet. They show how deeply people suspect that the past is larger than the version handed down to them. And perhaps, in a quiet way, that suspicion is not entirely wrong. Not because every alternative theory is true, but because every archive is partial, every empire forgets, every science revises, and every map is made by someone standing in a particular darkness. The old charts remain on paper, fragile and brown, while the true continent remains under ice, immense and unread. Between them lies the question that refuses sleep. Did the maps know too much, or do modern people simply know too little about the ways knowledge disappears? And if even one fragment of the ancient memory can survive by being copied through centuries of error, what other fragments may have passed into myth waiting for a colder archive to make them visible again? If old maps leave behind the suspicion that knowledge can vanish, then the modern governance of Antarctica gives that suspicion a colder room to inhabit. The continent is not owned in the ordinary way. It is not a kingdom, not a colony in the older sense, not a homeland with ancestral graves and songs rising from villages. It is administered through agreements, claims held in suspension, scientific stations, environmental rules, and a shared promise that this white land should not become another theatre of conquest. On paper, this is one of the more hopeful arrangements in modern history. In the imagination, it can feel like a locked gate. The Antarctic Treaty was signed in 1959 and entered into force in 1961, at the height of a century that had learned to divide the planet with terrifying efficiency. Yet in Antarctica, nations agreed to set aside military activity, prohibit nuclear explosions and radioactive waste disposal, and preserve the continent for peaceful purposes and scientific investigation. It sounds almost impossible, a white exception beneath a dark century. While the rest of the world hardened into blocks and borders, Antarctica was declared a place where open scientific exchange should prevail, and still, the very words meant to reassure can also unsettle. Restricted activities, protected areas, special permits, environmental protocols. These are necessary phrases, born from caution and stewardship, yet they carry the tone of controlled access. One cannot simply wander into Antarctica as one might walk into an old ruin or cross a desert road. The continent resists visitors by climate first, then by law, logistics, cost and distance. Every layer is reasonable. Every layer can be explained. But reason does not fully dissolve the feeling that something is being kept beyond reach. This is where the mind begins to confuse protection with concealment. In many places, protection has indeed followed damage. Tombs are locked because tombs were looted. Caves are closed because breath and touch can destroy ancient paintings. Archaeological sites are guarded because curiosity can become theft. The modern world has learned slowly that access is not always innocence. Antarctica extends that lesson to a continental scale. It is protected because it is fragile, because pollution lingers, because invasive species can arrive on boots and equipment, because even a small disturbance can have consequences where recovery is slow. But there is another history behind suspicion. Institutions have hidden things before. Empires have rewritten records. Churches, states, corporations, and scientific establishments have all, at different moments, defended authority by narrowing what could be asked. Not every secret is imaginary. Not every official statement is false. The difficulty lies in knowing which caution is honest and which silence has another motive. Antarctica, by being remote and regulated, becomes a perfect surface for that old human doubt. It does not need to contain a conspiracy in order to attract one. The treaty system also creates an unusual paradox. Antarctica is international yet inaccessible to most of humanity. It belongs, in a moral sense, to no single nation, yet only wealthy states and well-funded institutions can maintain a serious presence there. It is dedicated to science, yet the instruments, stations and data networks that read it are often invisible to the ordinary public. This does not mean the research is false. It means the relationship between public imagination and expert knowledge becomes strained. When people cannot see a place for themselves, they must trust intermediaries. Trust is fragile, especially in an age that has made distrust feel like intelligence. So Antarctica becomes a mirror. Those who trust science see a rare triumph of cooperation, nations choosing restraint, researchers enduring harsh conditions to understand climate, biology, geology, and the future of the planet. Those who distrust institutions see something else, a continent fenced by treaties, guarded by distance, entered only by approved parties, spoken of in technical language. The same facts support opposite emotional readings. A research station becomes either a beacon or a watchtower. The truth may be less dramatic and more disturbing. Most of what is hidden in Antarctica is hidden not by human decision, but by ice, weather, time and physics. No government needs to cover a mountain range already buried beneath kilometres of frozen mass. No committee needs to hide a lake that cannot be reached without years of planning and extreme engineering. Nature has done the work of secrecy with a patience no institution could match. If there is a keeper of Antarctica, it is not a ministry or a cabal, it is cold itself. Yet human systems shape what questions are asked, who asks them, and how quickly answers travel. Funding priorities matter. National prestige matters. Climate politics matter. Military history lingers around exploration, logistics and technology, even when the treaty forbids military use in the ordinary sense. The line between scientific infrastructure and strategic interest can be delicate in any remote region. Again, this does not prove hidden crimes or forbidden ruins. It simply reminds the listener that no knowledge system floats above power. Even the study of ice takes place inside human history. This is why Antarctica feels so strangely modern as a mystery. Ancient mysteries often begin with missing texts or broken stones. Antarctica's mystery begins with access, data, jurisdiction, and interpretation. The hidden chamber is not only under the ice, it is also inside the relationship between what specialists know and what the public imagines. A satellite image can circle the world in seconds, yet its meaning may require years of training. A radar profile can show a buried valley, but to untrained eyes it may become a tunnel, a wall, a city, a secret, and perhaps that gap is where the continent whispers most powerfully. The treaty did not make Antarctica mysterious, it merely gave mystery a formal outline. It marked the continent as exceptional, set apart from ordinary possession, governed by unusual promises. This may be one of humanity's better decisions, and still it produces the feeling of a sealed archive. A thing protected from harm is also protected from casual witness. A place preserved for science is also a place where myth waits outside the laboratory door. Above the ice, flags move in brutal wind beside research stations that look temporary against the scale of the land. Human law sits there lightly, almost nervously, as if aware that it is speaking over a silence far older than diplomacy. Beneath the stations, the old landscapes remain indifferent to treaties. The buried rivers do not know they are protected. The lakes do not know they are studied. The mountains do not know they are named. And so the question passes onward, colder than accusation. When humanity locks a place away in order to preserve it, how does anyone know where preservation ends and forgetting begins? If preservation can resemble forgetting, then the ice core becomes one of Antarctica's most unsettling replies. It is not a monument. It does not look ancient in the way ruins look ancient. A cylinder of ice, lifted from a drill hole and held under controlled light, can seem almost too pure to carry history. Clear, cloudy, layered, fragile, it resembles frozen absence. Yet inside it are bubbles of air that once belonged to vanished skies, dust from old winds, traces of volcanic eruptions, chemical signals from oceans and continents, and the faint handwriting of climates that no human being witnessed. The ice core is a time machine without machinery, a library without language, a confession made by snowfall. Each layer began as weather. A storm passed over Antarctica. Snow fell, a season ended, more snow came, the earlier layer sank, compacted, changed slowly into firn, then into ice. Air was trapped between grains, then sealed into tiny bubbles. What had once been atmosphere became an inclusion, a small locked breath of earth. Thousands of such breaths accumulated, then tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands. The present stood on top of them unaware until human instruments learned how to descend. When scientists drill into Antarctic ice, they are not simply measuring temperature, they are reading a vertical memory of the planet. Ratios of oxygen and hydrogen isotopes speak of ancient warmth and cold. Greenhouse gases trapped in bubbles reveal carbon dioxide and methane from worlds long gone. Dust can suggest dryness and wind. Sulfate layers may whisper of eruption powerful enough to leave chemical ash across the frozen south. Nothing in the core tells its story like a human witness. There is no emotion in the ice. Yet the pattern is intimate because it records the conditions under which life elsewhere on Earth struggled, adapted, migrated, or vanished. The famous Antarctic ice cores have carried scientific memory back hundreds of thousands of years, beyond written history, beyond cities, beyond agriculture, beyond the earliest remembered gods. The Epica Dome Sea core reached into ice older than 800,000 years, revealing repeated glacial and interglacial cycles, the breathing rhythm of a planet that warms and cools according to deep orbital pacing, greenhouse feedbacks, oceans, and ice. More recent efforts have sought even older continuous ice, perhaps reaching past 1 million years, because somewhere in that deeper record may lie clues to changes in the rhythm of ice ages themselves. The desire is not merely to know the past, it is to understand why the past changed its tempo. This is where the ice core differs from the disputed map. An old map may provoke doubt because its intention is human. Someone drew it, copied it, selected it, distorted it, believed it, or used it. The ice core has no such intention. It did not mean to preserve the atmosphere. It did not choose one century over another. It did not protect kings, erase heretics, flatter patrons, or hide mistakes from rivals. In that sense, it can feel purer than history. But purity has its own terror. The ice core does not care whether its record comforts the present, and what it has shown is not comforting. Earth's climate has never been fixed. It has moved through vast changes, but those changes had rhythms, boundaries, and consequences. Civilizations grew during a comparatively stable warmth after the last ice age, when coastlines, seasons, crops, rivers, and migrations could settle into patterns long enough for memory to root. The ice reminds us that stability is not the default state of the planet. It is a window. A long window by human standards, perhaps, but still a window. Every temple, road, archive, and nation has existed inside conditions that are not guaranteed by any law of history. For a channel of human story, this is the most difficult mystery Antarctica preserves, not an object, but a warning about God. People ask what may lie beneath the ice because they imagine lost things, cities, texts, bones, forbidden knowledge. But the ice also preserves the conditions that decide whether such things can exist at all. Too much cold, too little rain, rising seas, shifting belts of drought, failing crops, changing coasts. These are not background details. They are the stage on which civilization appears and disappears. The actor may be human, but the stage is older and stronger. The ice core therefore becomes a kind of anti-archive. It does not remember names, it remembers thresholds. It does not tell who ruled, who prayed, who sailed, who died in a forgotten village. It tells what the air contained when they did so, what the temperature allowed, what volcanic dust drifted through the atmosphere, what invisible chemistry framed their choices. It reduces history to breath, and perhaps that reduction is the most humbling thing about it. Before a civilization can write, the air must permit lungs. Before a city can rise, seasons must permit grain. Before a myth can survive, enough people must survive to repeat it. And still, even the ice core is incomplete. The deepest ice may be folded, melted near bedrock, disturbed by movement, lost where glaciers flow too violently. Some ages are compressed so tightly that decades become difficult to separate. Antarctica preserves, but not evenly. It hides, but not perfectly. It speaks, but not without static. The archive is powerful because it is partial, and partial records have a way of creating further hunger. Each answer sends the drill deeper. One may imagine those trapped bubbles as tiny sealed rooms. Inside them is not treasure, not language, not prophecy, but air. Ancient air, patient air, air that touched no human body, and yet now tells human beings what kind of world they have inherited. The listener drifting near sleep might picture a scientist in a cold laboratory, holding a slice of ice against the light, seeing nothing dramatic, only faint lines and cloudy layers. But in that quiet peace rests the breath of volcanoes, forests, oceans, deserts, and perhaps the long prelude to every human age. If Antarctica can preserve the air of vanished worlds, then the question changes again. It is no longer only what lies under the ice, but what the ice has already lifted into our hands. And if ancient air can return as evidence, if climates can speak after hundreds of thousands of years, then what of the bodies, bones, leaves, eggshells, feathers, and buried remains at the edge of the frozen continent? What other forms of life, once ordinary beneath another sky, have been waiting not in rumour, but in stone? If ancient air can return from the ice as evidence, then the fossils at Antarctica's margins carry a more familiar and more mournful kind of testimony. They do not speak in bubbles or chemistry. They speak in bone, leaf, shell, feather, and stone. They appear where the continent is not completely sealed, where mountains break through the ice, where islands and peninsulas expose older layers to wind, tools, and patient eyes. These remains do not belong to the Antarctica most people imagine. They belong to a continent that had seasons, animals, plants, and shorelines connected to a world so unlike the present that the mind must almost build a second Earth to hold it. On Seymour Island, near the Antarctic Peninsula, fossils have emerged from rocks that record warmer ancient seas and coastal environments. There have been shells, fish, marine reptiles, penguins, and birds from ages when the southern world was changing but not yet sealed in the modern way. The island feels in thought like a small torn edge of a buried manuscript. Most of the page remains under ice, but this corner has lifted just enough for a few lines to be read. And the lines are not empty. They are crowded with life. Among the most haunting Antarctic fossils is Vegavis, a bird from the age near the end of the dinosaurs, known from late Cretaceous rocks. It matters not because it is enormous or monstrous, but because it belongs near the ancestry of modern birds, close to ducks and geese in the broad family of avian life. In a world still carrying non-avian dinosaurs, in a southern landscape far removed from human imagination, something with a familiar echo moved through air and water. That is the strange tenderness of deep time. The past is alien, and then suddenly it offers a shape that feels almost known. There are also fossil leaves, wood, and traces of plants that once grew in Antarctic regions. Some belong to lineages related to southern beach and other Gondwanan vegetation, reminders that the continents now separated by oceans once shared biological memory. A leaf pressed into stone can seem too fragile to carry such meaning, yet it does. It says that Antarctica was not always an ending. It was part of a connected world, a route in the old southern geography, a place where climates allowed growth and where species moved through evolutionary stories that later became scattered across the southern hemisphere. This is where Antarctica begins to challenge not only history, but the emotional habits of history. People are trained to think of ruins as human, a broken wall, a buried road, a tomb chamber, a clay tablet. These feel like evidence because they were made by intention. Fossils are different. They are ruins without builders. They are remains of lives that never knew they would become signs. A dinosaur bone or fossilized leaf has no message, and yet it changes the story more deeply than many inscriptions. It reminds the listener that before culture there was world. Before memory there was life. Before any civilization worried about being forgotten, entire ecosystems had already vanished without witnesses. Antarctica's fossils also soften the boundary between extinction and preservation. The animals are gone, the forests are gone, the warm seas are gone. Yet the forms remain in stone, partial and broken, enough for reconstruction, enough for argument, enough for awe. The fossil is both absence and survival. It is not the creature, but neither is it nothing. It is the shape left behind when time removes the body. In that sense, fossils are close to memory itself. A memory is not the event. It is what the mind is able to keep after the event has disappeared. This makes the frozen continent feel less like a blank and more like a graveyard arranged by climate. But graveyard may not be the right word either, because a graveyard implies care. Antarctica did not bury its old worlds tenderly. It shifted, cooled, flooded, froze, crushed, exposed and concealed. It preserved some remains by accident and destroyed countless others without ceremony. The fossil record, like every archive, is unfair. It favours hard parts, lucky places, sudden burials, durable sediments. It does not keep all voices, it keeps what conditions permit. And perhaps that is the deeper link between fossils and human history. People often speak of the past as though it were waiting intact, needing only discovery. But the past is damaged before it is found. It has passed through fire, water, pressure, erosion, politics, language loss, burial, and neglect. The history that reaches the present is not the full history, but a survivor. Antarctica makes this brutally clear. The continent does not offer a complete museum of its former life. It offers fragments, a tooth, a feathered hint, a pollen grain, a trunk turned to stone, a coastline written into sediment. From these, entire vanished environments must be imagined carefully, with humility. For the more speculative mind, each fossil also asks why human beings are so eager to find themselves in every mystery. When faced with Antarctica, many leap toward hidden cities or forbidden ancestors, yet the real record is already immense, and it does not need humanity at its centre. The continent preserves a truth older than human pride, that Earth has been many worlds, and most of them did not require human beings to be complete. This can feel like a loss, but it can also feel like release. The world is not smaller because humanity arrived late. It is larger because it was already deep. Still, the human question cannot be entirely removed. If a continent can preserve birds from the age of dinosaurs, forests from polar warmth and air from ancient climates, then it teaches how preservation works before culture begins. It teaches what may survive when conditions align. It teaches what may vanish even when it once seemed abundant. These lessons return quietly to civilization. Cities may believe themselves permanent because stone feels strong. Archives may believe themselves secure because walls are locked. But compared with ice, sediment, and geological time, human certainty is thin. At the margins of Antarctica, fossils lie in exposed rock while the interior remains sealed. This contrast is almost unbearable. The edges speak just enough to prove that the silence is not empty. They show birds, plants, seas, and ancient warmth, while the deeper continent keeps most of its buried memory beyond reach. It is as if a vast book has allowed a few illustrations to fall out from between frozen pages. The reader bends to pick them up, studies them by dim light, and realizes not that the story is solved, but that the unread portion is larger than anyone wished to believe. So the fossil remains do not close the mystery, they widen it. They show that Antarctica once belonged to life, that life left traces, and that traces can survive across gulfs of time that make human history seem brief as breath on glass. But they also remind the listener that preservation is selective, uneven, and merciless. If leaves, bones, and ancient birds can wait in stone at the edge of the white continent, what has the ice chosen not to return? And what does it mean for any civilization, ancient or modern, to hope that the future will find more than fragments? If fossils at the margin show what the continents are allowed to escape, then the deeper question turns toward everything the ice has taken back. Antarctica is not a gentle archive. It does not preserve as a librarian preserves, with labels and categories. It preserves like a storm preserves a footprint under sudden snow, like a tomb preserves a body by denying it warmth, like the sea preserves a ship only after breaking it away from the living world. To say that the ice saves the past is true, but incomplete. The same ice that guards can grind. The same cold that delays decay can crush the form that decay would have spared. Antarctica keeps and destroys with the same white hand. This double nature matters because every mystery beneath the continent must pass through it. A buried landscape may survive where the ice is slow and frozen to its bed. A valley may remain recognizable, a river channel may still hold its ancient curve, and a mountain range may sleep beneath its own white ceiling. But elsewhere ice moves like a continent-sized blade. It drags rock, deepens troughs, erases soil, and scrapes away the soft surfaces where delicate evidence might have lived. The listener may imagine the ice sheet as stillness, but it is motion slowed to the edge of prayer. This is why Antarctica resists the simple fantasies placed upon it. If someone imagines an ancient city beneath the ice with streets, towers, inscriptions, and doors waiting untouched, the ice itself becomes the first objection. Not a dismissive objection, but a physical one. What part of such a city could survive millions of years of pressure, glacial movement, burial, freeze, and grinding stone? Stone may last, but arrangement is fragile. Walls depend on context, roads depend on surfaces. Meaning depends on the chance that later eyes can still recognize intention. Time does not only break objects, it breaks the pattern that tells the mind an object was once chosen. And yet the refusal of the perfect city does not empty the mystery. It may make it more serious. Human beings often look for survival in the wrong form. They ask whether a building still stands, whether a text remains readable, whether a tool can be held in the hand. But the deeper survival may be environmental, chemical, geographical, or symbolic. A coast drowned by sea rise leaves no library, but it may leave genetics, myths of flood, changes in settlement, gaps in archaeology, stories told beside later fires. A vanished climate leaves no throne, but it leaves migrations, collapses, adaptations, and silence where a culture should have continued. Antarctica asks whether civilization should always be searched for as architecture, or sometimes as disturbance. The ice also reveals a cruelty hidden inside preservation. To preserve something completely, one must often remove it from life. The air bubble survives because it is sealed away. The subglacial lake remains ancient because it is isolated. The fossil endures because the living organism has died and entered mineral memory. Preservation is not rescue in the human sense. It is separation. It saves by ending participation. Perhaps this is why archives can feel like graveyards and graveyards like archives. Both are places where the past is protected from change because it can no longer change itself. In that way, Antarctica becomes a vast meditation on what it means to be remembered. A civilization wants to survive as voice, laws, poems, names, monuments, rituals, songs, the warmth of one generation teaching the next what mattered. But the Earth remembers differently. It remembers through layers, isotopes, erosion surfaces, ash bands, shorelines, bones, and trapped gas. The Earth's memory does not care about honour. It does not distinguish between a king and a fern unless both leave different traces. It does not preserve what was loved, only what conditions allowed. This is not injustice exactly. It is something older than justice. And this should trouble any human confidence in history. The record available to the present is not only shaped by truth, it is shaped by durability. Stone outlasts wood, Dry caves outlast wet forests. Fired clay outlasts spoken language. Desert tombs outlast coastal villages. High-status burials outlast the lives of the poor. Catastrophe can preserve a city better than centuries of peace. The past, as it arrives, is biased toward what survived the material test. Antarctica is simply the most extreme teacher of that lesson. One might think of the people who lived at the end of the last ice age, not in Antarctica but across coasts and river mouths now drowned by rising seas. Much of what they knew may have been lost, not because they were primitive, but because they lived in places the ocean later took. Around the world, continental shelves once exposed are now underwater, and archaeologists increasingly understand that prehistoric life was not confined to the dry land still visible today. The missing record is often not a mystery of intelligence, but of shoreline. This broader truth returns the Antarctic question to human history without forcing false claims upon the ice. Perhaps the continent's greatest lesson is not that an ancient human civilization waits under it, but that human civilization everywhere depends on fragile surfaces. A coast, a floodplain, a valley, a cave mouth, a river terrace. Each seems solid while people live there. Each can become unreadable under water, ash, sand, jungle, city, or ice. The official story of the past may be broadly right, and thinner than the lived past itself. Not false, perhaps, but incomplete in the way every surviving map is incomplete. So when Antarctica erases, it is not doing something alien to history. It is doing what history always does, only more visibly and more severely. It chooses by force of physics. It lets some fragments rise and presses others into silence. It leaves the margins speaking and the interior sealed. It gives enough evidence to awaken wonder, never enough to satisfy hunger. And because of that, the continent becomes less a place of answers than a place where the idea of evidence itself grows unstable. Above the buried valleys and sealed lakes, the surface remains almost blank. The eye sees whiteness, but the mind now knows that whiteness is not simplicity. It is a cover made of time. Beneath it, some things have been saved because they were buried, and other things have been lost because they were buried too well. If ice can both protect and annihilate, if memory can survive only by becoming unreachable, then the next question moves closer to humanity. When people speak of lost civilizations, are they always searching for cities, or are they really searching for proof that something human once stood against erasure and almost succeeded? If the ice can protect and annihilate in the same motion, then the phrase lost civilization begins to change its shape. It is too easy to imagine civilization as masonry. Walls, gates, drawers, roads, temples, carved names, a throne room waiting in dust. This is the kind of evidence the eye understands quickly, and because it understands it quickly, it begins to demand it from every mystery. But civilization is not only what stands upright after catastrophe, it is also a pattern of living, a memory system, a way of arranging food, time, labour, belief, navigation, burial, exchange, fear, and hope. Before a city becomes visible, a civilization has already begun as relationship. Antarctica complicates this because it refuses the familiar scale. No serious evidence places a human city beneath its ancient ice, and the deepest buried landscapes belong to ages far older than human history. That boundary must remain clear. The mystery weakens when it is forced to carry what the evidence does not support. Yet a different question survives the correction. What if the real lesson of Antarctica is not that a lost city waits below, but that humans have misunderstood what loss looks like? Perhaps the most important things are not always preserved as objects. Perhaps some are preserved as absences, as shifts, as distortions in the story later people inherit. Consider the way human societies depend on climates they rarely understand while living inside them. A river floods with enough regularity, and agriculture becomes thinkable. A coastline remains stable long enough and harbours gather boats, languages, marriages, trade and gods. A lake recedes, a desert advances, a glacier melts, a sea rises, and what once seemed permanent begins to move under the feet of the people who trusted it. The collapse of a society may later be described in political, moral, religious, or military terms, but underneath those explanations the Earth may have shifted first. In this sense, Antarctica is not a stage for a human-lost civilization. It is a warning about the stage itself. It shows that environments can become unrecognizable. Forest can become ice, river can become buried groove, lake can become a sealed black room, mountain can become invisible. If such transformations can happen to a continent, then smaller transformations can certainly happen to the places where people built their lives. The past may not be missing because someone hid it. It may be missing because the ground on which it happened no longer resembles a place where history could have occurred. This is why the absence of cities beneath Antarctica should not end the conversation. It should refine it. The human hunger for lost civilization often points toward Atlantis, Lemuria, secret chambers, or technological ancestors erased by catastrophe. People sense correctly that the official record is thinner than everything that happened. They sense that the beginning of civilization was not a clean sunrise over one valley, but a long, uneven dawn across many landscapes, some preserved, some drowned, some buried, some remembered only in story. The error is not in suspecting loss. The error is in demanding that every loss take the shape of a hidden empire. The end of the last ice age offers a quieter model. As ice sheets melted, seas rose and coastlines moved. Places where people may have lived, gathered shellfish, built seasonal camps, navigated estuaries or watched the horizon are now underwater. These were not necessarily great kingdoms, but they were human worlds. They had paths, tools, kinship, memory, perhaps sacred places known only through speech. When the sea covered them, it did not only cover land, it covered context. Later archaeology would find more on high ground than low, more where preservation allowed than where life may have been richest. A map of surviving evidence is not the same thing as a map of ancient importance. Antarctica extends that lesson into deep time. It says that surfaces are temporary witnesses. It says the absence of evidence must be weighed carefully, neither worshipped nor ignored. The continent's hidden valleys do not prove human antiquity, but they prove that visibility is not reality. What cannot be seen may still exist. What exists may be unreadable. What is readable may represent only the small fraction that escaped destruction. This is not permission to believe every speculation. The word civilization also carries pride inside in it. It suggests advancement, order, monument, and hierarchy, yet many old societies may have had forms of intelligence that left fewer durable marks. Navigation across oceans, seasonal world knowledge, medicinal plants, oral law, star memory, ecological restraint, ritual calendars, and symbolic landscapes can be sophisticated without becoming pyramids. If later ages recognize only stone, they may mistake quiet complexity for absence. They may call people primitive because the materials of their wisdom return to Earth. Antarctica, in its silence, almost mocks this prejudice. The continent itself holds no marble archive, yet it contains records more ancient and exact than any imperial chronicle. Air in bubbles, climate in isotopes, landforms under ice, fossils in stone, microbial hints in brine. Its memory is not civilized in the human sense, but it is profound. It reminds the listener that the deepest archives are not always built. Some accumulate, some freeze, some sink. Some are carried in genes, myths, currents, sediments, and scars. A civilization may disappear from view while its consequences continue moving through the world. So perhaps the search should not be for a city under the ice, but for the ways ice changes the meaning of history. It asks whether future beings, looking back at the present after some great transformation, would find the evidence needed to understand us, or only fragments twisted by survival. Plastic in sediment, concrete ruins, chemical layers, a few digital ghosts unreadable without the machines that made them. Would they know our songs, our fears, our late-night voices telling stories into darkness? The hidden Antarctica beneath Antarctica remains mostly non-human, older than human longing, indifferent to the names placed upon it. Yet this indifference is the very thing that makes it useful to human thought. It does not flatter the species. It does not arrange itself around our myths. It teaches that worlds vanish by becoming conditions for other worlds. Sometimes a civilization disappears first from its shoreline, then from its language, then from its descendants' certainty that it ever mattered. And if that is true, then the next layer of the Antarctic mystery may not lie beneath the oldest ice alone, but in the new shapes modern instruments are beginning to draw from under East Antarctica. Not cities, perhaps, and not proof of forbidden ancestors, but forms large enough to remind the present that a buried continent still has a body, and that the body may be stranger than the legend. If the hidden continent still has a body, then modern instruments have begun to trace its bones with a patience older explorers could not have imagined. East Antarctica, especially, has long carried the reputation of permanence. It seems like the old stable half of the frozen world, a massive shield under ancient ice, less dramatic than the collapsing shelves and fractured headlines of the West. But stability is not simplicity. Beneath that apparent calm, radar, gravity, magnetics, and satellite altimetry have revealed basins, ridges, troughs, buried highlands, and deep places where the bed lies far below sea level. The white surface says stillness. The hidden bed says history. There is a quiet shock in learning that Antarctica is not shaped like the surface above it. The ice smooths everything. It spreads brightness over the continent until difference becomes invisible. But beneath it, the land falls and rises with severe complexity. There are trenches deeper than expected, old river-carved surfaces, mountain roots, and basins that reach inward like dark bowls beneath the ice sheet. Some of these places matter not only because they are old, but because they help decide the future. Ice does not merely sit on land. It responds to the slope beneath it, to deep channels, to contact with ocean water, to hidden valleys that guide its movement toward the sea. Here the mystery becomes less ancient and more immediate. The buried shape of Antarctica may determine how fast parts of the ice sheet change in a warming world. A basin below sea level can become a weakness if warm ocean water reaches the grounding line of a glacier. A trough can guide retreat inland, a ridge can slow it. The hidden topography is not passive background. It is the unseen machinery of the ice. To understand the continent's future, one must read the continent's buried body. The past hidden under ice has become a forecast. This is another reason Antarctica unsettles the mind. Its secrets are not safely behind us. They are not all fossils, ancient forests, sealed lakes, and disputed maps. Some are active structures that decide what may happen to coastlines far away. A person sleeping in Florida, Louisiana, New York, or the low coastal towns of another continent may never see Antarctica. Yet the geometry beneath its ice may one day affect the waterline near their home. The most remote place on Earth is connected by sea level, weather, carbon, and the invisible agreements of physics. In recent years, maps of the bed beneath Antarctica have become more detailed, but detail has not made the continent feel smaller. It has made it more intricate. Mapping efforts have combined radar soundings, ice motion, gravity, and other data to infer the terrain beneath the ice. Names like Wilkes Subglacial Basin, Aurora Subglacial Basin, and the Deep Trough near Denman Glacier are not household words, yet they belong to a hidden geography that may shape centuries. They sound technical, almost dry, but behind them lies an image as strange as any legend. Enormous lowlands under ice, some sloping in ways that could make retreat difficult to stop once begun. The speculative mind may wish to turn every basin into a buried country and every straight line into a wall, but the more serious wonder lies in the scale of natural architecture. A subglacial basin is not less mysterious because it is not human-made. It is older, broader, and more consequential. It shows that the continent has a memory of tectonics, erosion, and climate long before any human calendar began. It says that the surface humans see is an edited version of the land, and that the full sentence continues underneath in a language of depth, slope, pressure, and stone. There is also something humbling in the way these maps are made. No one has walked the buried floors of the Aurora Basin. No one has stood at the bottom of the Denman Trough and looked upward toward miles of ice. The places exist as inferred form, assembled from traces. Science here does not remove mystery by touching the object. It builds a faithful shadow from signals that return through cold. This is knowledge, but it is knowledge haunted by distance. The more exact the map becomes, the more one senses the impossibility of ordinary presence. The new shapes beneath East Antarctica also return the listener to the question of erasure. If so much can be mapped beneath the ice only now, how many earlier certainties were built on the surface alone? For generations, a blank white interior could be treated as stable because it looked stable, as permanent because it appeared unchanged. But hidden slopes and basins complicate that comfort. The old surface was never a full truth. It was a cover. A beautiful cover, perhaps, but still a cover. History has often made the same mistake with civilizations, judging permanence from monuments, strength from walls, continuity from official records, while hidden weaknesses gathered beneath. In this way, the Antarctic bed becomes a metaphor too precise to ignore. A society may have its own unseen topography, debts, droughts, tensions, forgotten injustices, fragile harvests, myths no longer believed, technologies no longer understood. From the surface it may appear smooth, then pressure changes, warmth enters from an unexpected side. A grounding line retreats, what seemed fixed begins to move. The collapse, when it comes, appears sudden only to those who never mapped what lay underneath. Still, Antarctica should not be reduced to a warning alone. It is also a lesson in patience. The buried continent waited through ages before instruments could read it. Its forms did not hurry toward meaning. They existed without needing to be interpreted. Human beings arrived late, anxious and clever, and began turning echoes into maps. Perhaps every discovery there is less a conquest than an apology for having mistaken whiteness for emptiness. Beneath East Antarctica, the newly traced shapes remain cold, immense, and mostly inaccessible. They are not ruins in the human sense. They are the ruins of older climates, older tectonic arrangements, older rivers, older surfaces, and they now belong to the future as much as the past. If their slopes and basins decide how the ice responds, then the buried world is not finished speaking. It is speaking through sea level, through models, through cracks, through slow acceleration, through the nervous attention of scientists watching margins that once seemed eternal. And so the final layer begins to form in the dark. If Antarctica's hidden body can still change the fate of distant shores, then perhaps the last unopened page is not under the ice at all, but inside the human belief that the past is safely behind us. If the past is not safely behind humanity, then Antarctica becomes less a place than a warning written in white. It does not warn loudly. It does not speak in the language of disaster films, forbidden doors, or sudden revelations. Its warning is slower and more difficult to hear. It says that what is buried is not always gone. It says that what appears stable may be moving. It says that a world can change its face so completely that later generations mistake the mask for the original skin. And perhaps most unsettling of all, it says that memory does not belong entirely to human beings. The continent at the bottom of the Earth does not need a hidden empire in order to remain mysterious. It does not need towers under the ice, or inscriptions sealed in blue darkness, or a map copied from vanished navigators who knew more than they should have known. Those images may gather in the mind because human beings search for themselves inside every darkness. They want the secret to have hands, motives, builders, witnesses. They want the buried thing to be a civilization because civilization is the form of loss they understand. But Antarctica's deeper mystery may be colder than that. It may be the possibility that Earth has many archives and most of them were not made for human reading. A forest can vanish and still leave pollen. A river can disappear and still leave a valley. A lake can be sealed away and still hold chemistry, pressure, darkness, and perhaps life reduced to its most patient form. Mountains can exist without sight. Air can wait in bubbles for hundreds of thousands of years. Fossils can return from stone like messages sent by creatures that never intended to speak. None of these things are rumours. None require exaggeration. Yet together they create a feeling more disturbing than any single claim. The world is older, stranger, and less visible than the surface augurs. Maybe that is why Antarctica has become a vessel for modern suspicion. In an age that believes it has mapped everything, the continent remains partly unread. In an age that believes data has replaced myth, it still offers darkness, distance, restricted access, and hidden forms. It is governed by treaties, studied by specialists, watched by satellites, crossed by aircraft, drilled by science, and still it refuses to become ordinary. The refusal is not rebellion, it is scale. Human certainty is small there. Human language seems to freeze at the edges. There is comfort in this, if one allows it. A person listening in a dark room, perhaps far from ice, perhaps in a warm city with traffic dimming outside the window, may feel the mind loosen around the thought. The world does not end at what is visible. The past does not end at what is written. The unknown is not always an enemy. Sometimes it is the space that keeps wonder alive. Sometimes it is the shadow beneath knowledge, not opposing it, but giving it depth. To know everything would be to flatten the world into a map with no margins. Antarctica keeps the margin, and yet comfort is not the same as innocence. The buried ice also carries a question about the present. If ancient air can reveal climates before civilization, then modern air is entering the same archive now. The atmosphere of the present will become someone else's ancient bubble, if anyone remains to read it. The carbon, the warmth, the industrial trace, the altered chemistry of this age may one day lie sealed beneath future snow or exposed in future melt. The archive is still being written. Humanity is not outside the record, examining it with clean hands. Humanity has become part of the layer. That thought changes the meaning of discovery. To drill an ice core is not only to look backward, it is to receive a mirror from the deep past. The mirror does not show faces. It shows conditions. It shows what climates can do, how rhythms shift, how thresholds matter, how the stage under civilization is never guaranteed. Perhaps this is why Antarctica's mysteries feel so heavy when carried into sleep. They are not simply about what may be hidden beneath the ice. They are about whether the present understands the ground beneath itself. The old dream of a concealed truth remains powerful. Somewhere, people will continue to imagine a doorway under the glacier, a chamber below the snow, a map that proves the world was known before memory admits it. Such dreams should not be treated with cruelty. They are often the symbolic language of a real grief. The grief of knowing that so much has been lost, that history is partial, that official stories sometimes arrive too clean, that the human past is scattered across drowned coasts and burned libraries, broken languages, and graves no one marked. The longing is real, but longing is not the same as proof. The quieter truth may be more lasting. Antarctica preserves not the certainty of a lost civilization, but the conditions that make every civilization fragile. It preserves evidence that Earth changes beyond human preference. It preserves the memory of warmth where there is now cold, forests where there is now ice, rivers where there is now silence hidden, water where the surface says death, and ancient air where the present hears warning. It does not accuse. It does not forgive. It simply remains. Perhaps, then, the final unopened page is not waiting to reveal a single secret. Perhaps it is waiting to teach a slower form of humility. A continent can be known and unknown at the same time. A mystery can be real without becoming a conspiracy. A past can be larger than its surviving evidence. A civilization can mistake its brief stability for destiny. Ice can cover a world, and still the world beneath can shape the future of distant shores. Far south, beyond the ordinary roads of human life, the white continent continues its long sleep. Winds pass over the plateau. Stations glow in the polar night and then fade into weather. Beneath them, lakes remain dark, mountains remain unseen, valleys remember rivers, and old air waits in blue depth. Nothing there hurries toward revelation. Nothing promises an answer before dawn. The ice keeps its silence not because it has nothing to say, but because it speaks in a language measured by pressure, cold and time, and somewhere within that sadness lies the gentlest and most haunting question of all. If the earth can forget so much and still carry the shape of it, what will it remember of us?